start with Melbourne, who has its share of worries tonight. Christian Petrarca and the Ribs will talk to. Simon Goodwin, though, was putting on a brave face about his team's loss tonight.
It's hard to sit there and say, but there were things in our game that were a lot better. There were things that we still need to work on. Collingwood's pressure was outstanding and we didn't deal with their pressure very well. It made our execution look pretty average at times, and certainly around the ball, we coughed up the ball way too much. So credit to them. You know, it's part of the game that clearly they are very elite at, and they brought that today to a really high level. So, but there was other things in our game where we took a big step forward.
I look forward to talking about Collingwood soon, about just how good they were considering what they're up against. But Melbourne, I think it's much of the same. Yeah,
was it a big step forward?
No, not what I saw. No, that was a game where you say that they can't win a premiership playing the way they do. I think their defence was okay. I thought Stephen May played a good game again. The midfield is fallen way back to the pack, and the forward line cohesion, which we talk about year after year, was an absolute mess today. They are so safe with the footy. Unless he is willing to give up something defensively to try and score more, they are a mile off it, Kane.
I couldn't believe the lack of response. That was the thing that struck me with all the emotion in this game. The talk about Braden Maynard, you wouldn't believe it, but they shook his hand before the start of the game. But their footy boss is Alan Richardson. He was asked before the game whether there'd be extra treatment for Braden Maynard.
No, it hasn't been mentioned. Well, I'll tell you where it's been mentioned. It was mentioned in a coaches' meeting. Do we need to mention it? Are we going to have Jack Viney or some of our more aggressive players, lose their marbles and go above and beyond, what we'd expect? And so we had a chat to the leaders. No, they think we're in a really good space there. Do I think that a bit like they did to Ed Langdon after some inappropriate comments a couple of years ago? If you get the opportunity to tackle, I imagine the tackle's going to be pretty hard. Yeah, well, you imagine wrong. Here's Darcy Moore. I reckon he says here, they can't go with us. Let's break their spirit. So let's look at the start of the game. I've lip-read that. They're shaking his hand. Couldn't believe it. A tap on the head. Let's shake hands with the opposition before this game. This is the first proper contest in this game. And look at this from Bobby Hill. He just shrugs him off, the first one. So there's no statement. There's no response after what happened last week. And then this is Maynard. This is the flip side of the coin. He was unbelievable. What a player he is to cope with the boos, to drown out the boos.
So
to
you
put
think they should give him a harder time
100%
on the back of the finals?
100% they should have. All the emotion. Lee Matthews had spoken about that pre-game. Got to go after him. He was the one that hunted them. Some of these efforts here, this is incredible. Like, he absolutely bullied them. So to Alan Richardson, who spoke about the extra treatment, the extra tackle pre-game, there was none of that. And Darcy Moore was right. They broke their spirit in the first 30 seconds of this game.
I agree about the positive stuff about Collingwood, but I can't understand why you would... The anger from Melbourne last year, Maynard did one inappropriate thing after the original hit on Angus Brayshaw, which was going to his house. Their anger was directed at the AFL for not standing up to what Maynard did. I mean, I don't think that sort of maker's statement...
Well, you wrote a column about Angus Brayshaw and his troubles at the moment. That was the player that inflicted that. Surely that is all wrapped up in that, Caro. We're not shaking hands with the player that has essentially ended someone's career the first game you get the opportunity to do it.
But do you think that then leads to the lack of pressure? Do you think the two things are linked?
Lack of response. I think there had to be an emotional response. I saw Darcy Moore, he was up for it. I see Bobby Hill, who's not a tough, aggressive player, shrugging off because he picked it in the first 30 seconds. I see Melbourne lay 40-odd tackles. I see them lay 7 inside 50 tackles. So all of that, I see them lose centre clearances 14-6. I see them, all of that goes into a lack of response. That's a team that we'd been speaking about all week. Well, Melbourne aren't going to cop this. There's going to be a response. They got smashed from Fremantle, and the first opportunity, they're shaking hands and missing tackles.
Oh, I'm with Carol a bit. Like, you shake hands out of respect. I reckon going after a player is bravado. But I agree with you on the lack of tackles and this aspect of it from Clayton Oliver. Like, I'm more interested. Mark Williams with this Clayton at half-time, trying to talk to him about his kicking. I think when Mark Williams first got to the club, he said, Clayton, you're not a good kick, and I'm here to try and fix it. I'm going to here to fix it. And it was back to the Clayton Oliver that I saw 4 years ago. Like, Hutchie, it was so poor.
Why do you think that is? Is it lack of preparation into the season and fitness is affecting it?
Yeah,
is it
I think if you're a young kid
self-confidence in his game
and you're watching and you think you can get away with it, the odd person can, but this was then a lack of effort to try and push back. So
they hunted him as well.
Do you think his bravado's gone a little bit? Like, he plays on the edge at his best.
Yeah, absolutely, it's gone. Like, they had young kids in the centre bounce today. They had guys like Lockie Sullivan, McRae Gray played a good game in the centre bounce. And then this was just the over-handballing, over-possessing. He spoke about the lack of... The fundamentals were really, really poor by Melbourne today. Yet you had a team like Collingwood who... Unbelievable system. This is Collingwood. So they just have the next man up, and they have such a strong system about them. I tip Melbourne, but embarrassingly, because I just think this side just has people step up for them. I probably did off the back of against the Western Bulldogs, they fell short.
Well, and because Collingwood have got half their side out. But they just, as I said, system, pressure, unity. This went for a goal, Lordo, from the goal line.
Yeah, so, Kane, this is what frustrates me with Melbourne. This Specky here from Hoskinell, they would stop here and they would go sideways or backwards. They just went. And they just play fast, exciting football. And you've got Kruger, who's played 15 games in 6 years. He's no star, but that'll catch out any defence if you move the ball quickly, which Melbourne refused to do.
Just a final word on Oliver, how far he has fallen, and we're not picking on him because we spoke about him last week, that the opposition now think he's vulnerable and you can expose him. So what Chris did today to match up on him at stoppage and then expose him the other way, and he only had 3 clearances as well. So when he's not doing that, when he's turning it over and when the opposition, Caro, are exposing him on the way out, then that's a real issue for them.
You talk about being monstered, though, by the crowd. I mean, Stephen May, they were booing him as loudly as Braden Maynard, and he stood up. So I don't think that mental side of... I just think they're severely out of form.
And then Petrarca could make it worse for them because suspected broken ribs, there's no formal verdict here, but these pitches wouldn't have given you any confidence in the Melbourne fans.
Geez, brave, though, to come
Went back on, which was so gallant. Yeah. And then the last thing we saw of him today was in an ambulance off to the hospital. So that would be... I mean, it's hard to imagine their season getting its wheels back on track without him in the team.
And just briefly on Angus Brayshaw, who they just miss so much on and off the field. I don't think it's a terrible scene, but obviously a smile on his face, which is good. I don't think I'd realised the depth of the devastation that Angus Brayshaw had suffered until I spoke to Simon Goodwin last week. So the plan was, Craig, that Angus Brayshaw was going to stay at the club in a development role while they negotiated his concussion payout. And he would work for the club full time. That lasted 1 week. I think being on the bench, the trauma of the shock of knowing his career was over at far too young an age, he couldn't deal with it. The club, as the coach said, they've given him the ultimate space. Then we heard James Brayshaw say today, before he went down the slide, that Angus was meant to be there with him initially. That was a plan, but he just, for reasons that he didn't sort of mention, he wasn't available. So I think Melbourne have to get past this, but it is a terrible thing that has happened to that player and very sad.